Our lives are a string of insights, flashes of inspiration that can be the catalyst for new ideas. However, our pace of life these days means we tend to miss some of them completely. I'm Dave Hill, and I'm the host of the Simple Reflections podcast, a fortnightly series of interviews with people from all walks of life. Our conversations are an invitation to reflect on some of the simple insights my guests have had that have gone on to have a profound impact on their lives. So grab a cuppa and a biscuit, join us, slow down for a little while and see what shows up for you. Welcome to the next episode of the Simple Reflections podcast. Today I'm joined by Chad Littlefield. To be honest, I didn't even know who Chad was 21 days ago, and I got an email from a firm called AJ & Smart telling me that I needed to be on a piece of training, which I didn't actually make it to, but I did see an interesting little video which took me down a rabbit hole that got me to get into touch with Chad. Chad is the co-founder and CEO of a firm called We and Me in the US. He's also the co-author of Ask Powerful Questions, which is a book that I've been devouring for the last couple of weeks. And he's a TEDx hijacker. He takes the TEDx form and just turns it on its head slightly by getting everybody in the crowd interacted in what's going on. And I just loved the buzz of that, and I could feel that just through watching a couple. Tad's coming to us today from Fairview in Pennsylvania. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a treat to be here. It's always a compliment when somebody reads your book or watches videos and likes it enough that they say, I want to talk more about it.
Definitely. Well, we were chatting before we came on. Curiosity is a real force of energy for me in terms of how I view most things. And in the past, if I didn't know something, I might have shut myself down and not bothered, just out of fear, hidden away from it. And now it's just wow, okay, what's behind this door? Let's go. This is going to be fun. And the energy that you and your late co-founder Will Wise brought to not only the book and the narrated version of the book on Audible, but also in the videos that I've been watching was really infectious. And that is what I try and find with the clients that I'm working with. Whatever background they are, I'm looking for a spark of enthusiasm and where their lights come on, where they become curious. I'm wondering how that shaped up for you. At what stage did that light bulb of curiosity really click on for you that led you down the path to where you are today?
It's maybe a dead end for me because I traveled through, I was probably appropriately curious as a kid, not overly curious, not underly curious. And then at some point, I had seen a movie with Robin Williams called Patch Adams, where Patch becomes a doctor to promote the quality of life over quantity and uses humor to do it. And I was so enamored with the way that he was able to heal people through connection in that movie that I had my life figured out. I was like, I'm just going to become a doctor. I'm thinking maybe a pediatrician. And all curiosity kind of drifted away for several years. And I was sure of my life path all through high school, into college, into the first chemistry class. And not the first semester of chemistry, Monday. The first chemistry class took, and it was like, oh, yeah, 10 more years of this, the whole med school thing, not going to work out. And so it actually, that reaching the dead end of certainty, kind of by force, got me curious again. And I had a mentor who I had like a little freak out cry session breakdown in my dorm room when that certainty conveyor belt ran out. And I called a mentor of mine, Eric Tyler, who wrote a book called The Best Advice So Far. And one of the main premises or ideas of the book, which I had forgotten about at that moment, was you always have a choice. You do not choose what happens to you, but you do get a choice in how you respond. Even if you have a gun to your head, you have a choice, or at least a couple choices of how you proceed. And Eric just reminded me, he was like, you can actually choose to drop that chemistry class. He's like, have you looked at any of the other majors at the university? I'm like, no. I was biology. That was it. And it was quite illuminating for me. It's like window opened up that when I chose to stop being certain and chose to be curious, what I discovered was at the university I went to, Penn State, there was 168 majors, and I had narrowly just gone focused into one. And so he was like, great, go through the list, highlight the ones that kind of intrigue you that you're curious about, go on a walk, come back, and then in pen, circle go back through the highlighted ones and circle the ones that you're really, really curious about. And so that journey, so there was one like big unlock there. At some point, probably a couple years later, um, I stumbled across an Elizabeth Gilbert quote that probably could have accelerated that process and saved me a mental breakdown a little bit earlier. And that was, you know, let go of what you are passionate about just for a minute. Let go of what you're passionate about and let go of following what you're passionate about and follow your curiosity, because chances are it will lead you to what you're passionate about. And I think it's such a compelling advice for somebody in any stage of life. Even as adults, right? It's like especially prevalent as someone's transitioning into university or something, and they're kind of trying to figure out what they want to do. It's especially relevant. But even later in life, like I find myself now, like kind of certain that I love swimming and open water swimming and scuba diving and water, and so I'm kind of like getting set or certain in
Mhm.
these hobbies. And I'm curious within that little domain, but like I haven't tried basket weaving. Not that I need to, but it's like just for me, I'm trying to tune in now. I've got little kids too, and they're helping with this. Trying to tune in to what end of the conveyor, what place on the conveyor belt of certainty am I on?
Mm.
Am I kind of walking through life in the place of knowing, or am I walking through life in the place of learning? Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. There's certainly something to be said by catching on to ourselves when we are uh, completely certain that this is the truth. Um, and then remind ourselves that actually we are a perpetual work in progress and that
Mm.
there is always more to learn. And therefore, whenever I'm feeling like, no, it's definitely my way, that's for me, that's the point for me to be aware and take a step back and go, right, well, is that really the case? What
Mm.
else might be at play here? And then all of a sudden you're back in the game and you know, all kinds of other possibilities can come up.
Yeah, you said something as you were describing simplicity in mind and the concept behind the podcast before we hit record. You said something about collecting people's experiences and the different perspectives of the world, and there's a lot of things. My dad always used to say, "Truth is truth," and so there are a lot of things that are like repainted versions of something that is generally true, right? So then, like all or most major world religions, there's some version of treat your neighbor as yourself, and there's certain things that are just like it seems like I think about it like the probability of truth. So
Hmm.
if I've heard the same idea from 1,000 different angles, the probability that it might be absolutely true in my mind goes up. So the probability that's not just one person's personal truth, but there's actually
Yep.
something to this goes up. But um, one of the things that kind of got me excited about the idea is Roger Schenck, who's kind of known as one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence, who passed away in the last handful of years, decade. I heard him kind of informally define intelligence one time as the number of cases you have in your head about a particular thing. And so it's like a teacher who's taught for 35 years, when they get a disruptive student, they're not like, oh my goodness, like, what do I do? They just think back and they're like, oh yeah, 5 years ago, I had Sammy, same kind of behaviors. I did this, it didn't work. I did this, it worked. And they pull that file out of their ungoogleable experience and they apply it there. And so they're very intelligent in that domain of how to deal with disruptive students because they've had many of them. And so I think the entire idea of the podcast of like collecting people's perspectives and experiences, I could argue that someone listening to your podcast and choosing to on repeat listen to your podcast is actually actively getting smarter because they're collecting more perspectives on the planet, which is cool.
Mhm.
So good
Thank you.
work.
Thank you. But very selfishly, I'm the first person doing all the collecting.
Yes.
so so
I gathered.
yeah, I know for a fact that I am learning way more as a result of um, picking up conversations with people all over the place and getting their different views, and getting a chance to walk with them for a short period of time and explore some ideas, that is absolutely benefiting the way I can navigate the world more, with more peace, with more ease, hopefully with a bit more grace, so that when I do rub up against the harshness of life, that I can hopefully, deal with that, uh, in a slightly more graceful way than I might have done otherwise.
Mm.
And that's exciting. And then obviously being able to share it with people is doubly fun, because I then get feedback, and it gets me thinking as I revisit each episode as I'm editing it. There's it's a sort of there's multi layers of it for me, which is wonderful.
You're also benefiting from the Hawthorne effect, the idea of people, which sometimes has negative effects, but the idea that when a camera turns on, when the record button starts, oftentimes, you could be chatting with somebody, they're super conversational, comfortable, and then some people, you hit record and they're like turn into a different person. They're like, you
Yeah.
got presenter voice, and it's not very authentic and natural. But one of the other sides of the Hawthorne effect is, because we're recording a podcast, you have my full presence and attention. Whereas if we were just on a chat and you were like wanting to just learn or pick your brain kind of call,
Mhm.
I might be busy that day. I might not even show up. I might not, like, there's all sorts of, but you've got my full attention and presence. And so I think but I mean, what you just said is the origin story of any really huge podcast, like a Diary of a CEO or Joe Rogan or any of these podcasts. They're individuals that, for better or worse, just are curious, and they find the people who they're especially curious about, and then they have long conversations with them. And so you think of like how many perspectives they've collected. At this point, these two guys have spent thousands of hours with some of the most compelling, interesting, talented people on the planet. It's like, that's the university I want to go to. And I think this is actually why Will and I became so powerful about questions, because while those are recorded podcasts and they happen to be popular, you're technically, every person is running a podcast 24/7 in their life.
Yeah.
The only thing they need to do to hit record is be curious, form that curiosity into a question, and let it out into the world at someone or something,
And then listen to the response.
and then actually listen to the response. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Which natural curiosity does guide people toward listening well, because if you actually are, which is the whole idea of the second chapter of the book, is like, ask questions that are rooted in our specific language, natural, genuine curiosity. And what I have since learned, since writing the book, what I've since learned is that curiosity is actually not a muscle. It's not something that you like practice better at, and some people are stronger and some people are worse. And for me, it's more of a light switch. You can just turn it on, but it's usually off as adults. And so all it is the choice to turn it on. And example I would offer is, if I held up a blank piece of paper and just said, be curious about it, start asking questions, go, we'll play ping pong back and forth, we could generate 50 questions about a blank sheet of paper, right? Where to come from, who made it, what's going to be written on it, where will it end up, how long will it take to decay, right? Long, 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 long list of questions. All I had to do was flip the light switch of curiosity. I think that's, if people like stopped listening right now and they took just that one idea, that will edit your future almost more than anything else, is realizing that you can just flip on that curiosity, and questions are the edit button for what happens next. So when I ask you a question, Dave, or you ask me a question, it literally changes the words that come out of my mouth in that moment, which is a pretty useful thing to keep in mind.
Hugely, hugely. Um, the you've been at this game for quite a while now. Um, Given that I briefly mentioned it during the introduction, but quite a lot of what you do is getting groups of people engaged and connected before you actually start doing anything, which is um, either paid lip service to or not done at all for most meetings, conversations, whatever they happen to be. Certainly with larger groups of people, because people go, "That's too difficult." Um,
Yep.
what would you say has been the overriding response from people when they come across this notion that just giving them some questions to, they don't even have to think their own ones up. Here's some questions to go and ask somebody else.
Yeah.
What is the sort of immediate feedback, sort of group feedback that you've had from that?
So first of all, at a zoomed out level, what you're speaking to is kind of my mission on the planet to consciously redesign the world for contribution and connection rather than consumption.
Mhm.
Right now, companies, people, individual software engineers are highly, highly incentivized to create things that are maximally addictive from a consuming standpoint. So you can sit on your couch in the dark, not interact with anyone, and consume 2.5 hours of TikToks or YouTube shorts or whatever is your drug of choice. And for me, I've talked to very few people who come out of a wormhole or a doom scroll, whether it's like literally on a device or just in general, like getting lost consuming something. Um, Very few people who come out and say, wow, ah, I'm so much better off now. And so for me, what you're alluding to and what you mentioned earlier of like being the TEDx hijacker is TEDx, lovely format. Somebody, take an expert, have them condense 10, 20, 30, 40 years of experience and expertise into a 10 or 20-minute talk. Very cool concept, right? It's like the too long didn't read version of
Mhm.
the world's greatest experts. Very cool in concept. In principle, if you go to a TEDx event, it's 8 hours of lectures with no audience contribution interaction at all. And so the only things that are going on are silent thoughts up here. There's no active learning, and meaning like you're sitting still, hands folded, consuming, taking in information. And so when I work with in the past when I've worked with a TEDx event or when I'm working with a client now, it's about flipping that dynamic and actually taking the podium that is literally or metaphorically on the stage and turning it around and putting everybody in the position of their own expertise. So back to your original question, what is people's response? Um, the facilitator's answer is it depends on the group and why they're meeting and who made them be there or why did they choose to be there,
Mhm.
etc. But for the most part, there's some reticence for about 12 seconds. And then the decibel level in the room quadruples, and it's the sound of everybody talking, and it's like peer pressure of wow, this is happening, this is really happening, and the energy just quadruples. And what I'll say to people is, if you want to do a science experiment with this, the next time you're in a group semi big, so I'm going to say semi big is like, you got at least 20 people in a room. If you're ever in a context where you're having table discussions, so you're at a table and you got 5 to 8 people at a table, if you're in the position of leading or facilitating that meeting, just ask the table to split in half and get into groups of about 3 people and have the same conversation around the same question, but in groups of 3 instead of groups of 8. And the energy in the room more than doubles. Um, Also, the decibel level, because the amount of people talking doubles, but the intimacy created, it's like if you ask somebody to speak in a group of 8 people or to go around at a conference room table and introduce themselves and their role and whatever, and they're one at a time going around in a group of 8 to 12 people, the only person that everybody's thinking about while that's happening is themselves. What am I going to say? Oh, I'm next. I'm really focused on me, 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 me. Whereas in a group of 1 or 2, not for everyone, but for most people, it's quite a bit less threatening because it's not like public speaking. It's like having a conversation with a friend or a spouse, as
Mhm.
opposed to presenting yourself to the public in a group of 8 or more people. And um, so when you say like, okay, when I flip the room for design for contribution, I'm not doing it willy nilly. I'm like extremely deliberate in how I'm setting that up, how I'm framing it, how I'm easing people in. Usually by the time I've invited someone to I've stopped talking and invited somebody else to start talking, I've already gathered a little bit of their participation in lower risk ways in
Hmm.
advance. And so, if I'm recently did a keynote with 3,000 executives in finance industry. And so I walk out on a stage and the first words out of my mouth are, uh, you're all at this event. You've probably met somebody who haven't already. When you walked up to that person, what questions did they ask you? And just popcorn them out. So I have a handful of people shouting out answers. And so right in the very beginning, I'm setting the tone. Hey, this is not a thing where you're just going to have to listen to a lecture and like be subjected to my PowerPoint slides. I'm going to involve you. Your participation and experience is not only welcome, but expected in that way. And so like in education, if you set the bar high, students will typically try to reach for that bar. If you set the bar low, they will typically try to reach for that bar. And so for me, it's part of it is actually setting the bar at, if you want to be here and get something out of it, bring yourself and your wisdom and your experience into the room. And I give people lots of choice in how they do that. And so one thing that, and this will be the last thing I share, you can tell I'm slightly passionate about this, Dave. One of the things I'll offer to people is when they are asked a question, one thing we forget sometimes is we give up some of our power without even knowing about it. When you're asked a question, you have 100% choice and autonomy in how you answer that question. So if I ask you, just pick one random off my desk. Dave, if you asked me, how did you learn your most important lesson in life? I could say, earlier I was like picking some weeds, kind of building a trail out in the woods, and didn't wear gloves, and I have poison ivy all over my wrists now. So that's about. And now I learned to wear gloves, and it's like that would be a truth for me,
Hmm.
right? It's not inaccurate. It's not a lie. I'm still recovering.
Or you.
But if you also ask me, hey Chad, how did you learn your most important lesson in life? I could say, ooh, when my co-founder Will passed away 3 years ago, it like really hit me that life is temporary for the first time. And I think everybody probably reaches that point, but for me, it was when he died. It was like life is temporary. Um, Nothing should make it onto my calendar that doesn't make a difference. And so I literally went onto Google Calendar and just started deleting meetings and letting people know, like happy to reschedule if we come up with a more. And I said this a little bit more eloquently. It was like happy to reschedule if we come up with a more compelling reason to meet.
Mm.
But reconnect or catch up. I have a no catch up on your calendar rule because of Will, right? So you can see what I'm getting at is same question, two
Yeah.
totally different answers at two totally different levels of depth, both very acceptable. And so when you remind people that they have 100% choice and autonomy in how they answer any given question, the ironic thing is most people choose the more challenging route and share something that's real, honest, and potentially even a bit deep.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Culturally relevant too. Like if I'm facilitating a group in China or the UK versus the US, I'm going to have slightly different framings and context and whatnot. But there's the gist.
Yeah. Yeah. It completely captured my imagination. It is. It is what I'm looking for in the relationships that I have in life, whether that's personal or work related, which is also personal, I suppose. But you know what I mean. There's a subtle difference there, um, and I have experienced it within groups, but not quite as upfront and as quickly as you guys have been able to engender, and it just got me hugely excited for the possibility of what is there for the discovery, I suppose, and the exploring, and I'm even more blown away that you said yes to to this invitation to come along, bearing in mind you had no idea who I was when I sent the email.
Yeah. I
So
think I'm
I.
trying to lean into too. So we talked a little bit about before hitting record about being
Mhm.
versus just doing or having. And I had a mentor recently really confront me that I built this business off the premise of connection, creating and inviting contribution into the world. And I have, for the last several years, done a lot of connection, but I have not always been connection.
Mm.
And this is a very subtle, nuanced difference, but it feels important to get. And some people listening will not get it. And if you do, um, it's possible something will click for you and you'll experience the rest of this day the minute you turn off the podcast a little bit differently. And for me, it was like when I flew out to meet this mentor, I flew out to California to spend a day with this mentor, Blake LaGrange. And I was doing connection on the way there. So like the flight attendant who was checking everybody in scanned my boarding pass, and I said, "Happy Sunday," and no real response. There was like zombie mode, just kind of scanning boarding passes. Then in California, Blake confronted me of like, I'm not sure that you're actually really living into and being connection, being connected. See what that feels like. And so on the way back, it was a Tuesday, same exact situation. Different flight attendant, zombie mode, scanning boarding passes. And I said the exact same words, except, well, happy Tuesday instead of Sunday. Happy Tuesday. And this time I was just doing it from a state of like all of my being in presence was looking to just give this one person a small uplift and to really see her, knowing that we only had 3 or 4 seconds to spend together and then we were off. And so it was not going to be connection through dialogue. It was going to be some other like deeper, bigger connection. And she like totally broke character, locked eyes with me. Her jaw kind of dropped and just in the most genuine way ever just said, "Thank you." Like totally like night and day, different reactions. Same words, same behavior, same context. The only difference that I can point to was my inner orientation and way of being in that moment.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
It brings us nicely onto another thing that jumped out whilst listening um, to your book, and that's the concept of uh, intention.
Mm.
Um, it is something that I've been brought up with, as part of. I think it's also true in the U.S. military, but certainly in the British military, during a set of orders, there is the commander's intent, and you're looking not only at the intent that you're going to give to the people that are that you're directly serving, but also you're looking at your boss's intent and their boss's intent, so that you're trying to wrap it all up together and go, right, is what I'm about to do fitting with that? Um,
Mm.
and I really enjoyed hearing the idea of being very clear at the outset of what the intent is, a little bit like you were saying with the when you're engaging a large audience, what is the intent behind me doing it this particular way? But being really clear around that so that people, one, know the direction of travel, and two, can be involved in making sure we stay on the right path, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Um,
Well, intention is like an anchor.
mm,
So, if I'm assuming you've been in conversation with somebody you care about before, and the conversation has gotten into some form of an argument or disagreement, or like you kind of feel like you're swimming in mud and there's like some level of conflict, it's really helpful to be able to step out of that mud and zoom back and be like, why are we talking right now? What is the intent? The intent is to actually be connected and really witness and see how each other are doing right now.
mm.
That's the goal. Somehow we wound up in a disagreement of how to raise kids, but here's where we are right now, or here's where we're actually, and coming back to that intention is, and in your words, or to your point, is kind of an anchor in a conversation.
Very much so. Um, but I also know that it is not normal in most organizations that any meeting has any form of intention. The agenda, I suppose, potentially loosely, but does that actually serve the purpose of what it is that we're trying to achieve? And being really clear about this is the reason we're all coming together. Does that stack up? And no being a perfectly good answer to that, and going, right, okay, well, let's not meet. Let's do something different.
Now, this is here's a push or a question back to you, and I know I'm jumping in here.
It's all good. No, no, happy days.
So, mentor and teacher of mine, Peter Block, I heard him recently share that he's interested in retiring the term leadership and replacing it with connector.
Hmm.
Which every year I host this connector summit. He knows, like, I'm very passionate about the idea of the position or identity of connector, regardless of what role you are in. And uh, so the norm in let's say organizational structure, whether it's military or corporate, nonprofit, is why are you here at this meeting? Because it was on my calendar, or because my boss told me to go. Like, that's the reason, and it doesn't go much deeper than that. Now, if you go one step beyond that, like level one of intention is the leader comes up with a compelling intention. Now, typically what I find is that comes out in the form of a goal. So our goal is to review numbers or to discuss the strategic plan and figure out what we're going to do this year. Level two beyond that is, and we didn't write about this in the book. This is kind of discovery since we wrote it, but most what people call intentions, mostly I would put in the category of a goal or an objective. And the difference between a goal or an objective and an intention for me is that an intention actually stretches over the needs and what the people in the room actually care about. So what is the
Hmm.
currency that they actually are concerned with and what's important to them? And your goal or objective needs to stretch in order to encompass that. So for example, we're going to meet to review our strategic plan, and then you add two magical words to the end of that sentence. So that. So we're going to meet to overview our strategic plan so that none of you are frustrated and confused in 3 months from now because you're not sure what you're doing or what direction we're heading. So people don't like to be confused at work. They like clarity in leadership. And so when you add that so that and you plug in a currency that they actually care about, all of a sudden that goal now stretches into something that I care about. Now that requires empathy to know what people care about. So in a military context, it might be I just want to get paid, do my time, and go back to see my family safely. And so it's like, hey, we're going to do this training right now. And it's going to feel really tedious and it's not going to be pleasant, and we're going to do it so that if you find yourself in a similar scenario, you can make it back to your family safely, right? And so just really great leaders learn to speak in the language of intention.
Hmm.
And it comes out in their emails, in their quick little one-on-ones with people, like as they're walking in the hallway. It comes out in large town halls. They're just constantly uttering intentions that have either the words so that or the general concept of sharing an intent that includes what somebody else cares about, not what you as the leader cares about. Because you as the leader typically care about something different than the individual contributor does.
Mm.
And
No, thank
sometimes
you
they're
for.
quite different.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely. Um, and then there's nothing wrong with that because it's the sum of all of those parts that enables an organization to deliver what it's delivering. If we all cared about the same thing, it probably wouldn't get done in the same way or necessarily as efficiently or well thought about for everybody involved. So no, thank you very, very much for making that distinction. That's very, very helpful.
Yeah. There you go.
What
And can I ask you a question?
please do, yeah, yeah.
What is this experience like for you?
Us
Our
having this
conversation.
conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a little meta question for you.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, I'm enjoying it, that's for certain. Uh, I never know where these conversations are going. So I'm always excited by that. Um, I'm just thrilled, I suppose, to be able to have this conversation with you to explore a little bit more about what I've learned, um, and to, get to ask you questions directly and learn a little bit more and then share that. Um, so there's an element of me, if I'm being honest, that is thinking about the episode itself in terms of the flow of it and all of that kind of stuff and conscious of your time. Um, but no, I'm just thrilled to be able to have an opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. It was one, I was genuinely curious about it, but I also, thinking a friend of mine, Mark Collard, likes to say that without reflection, no real learning can occur. And
Mm.
so trying to be more deliberate about that in my own life and helping facilitate that. Will used to say that um, his layman's definition of a leader was someone who's going to make something happen that wasn't going to happen anyway. Otherwise, what are you actually doing? Is if you're not making something happen that wasn't going to happen unless you created it, sparked it, generated some energy around it. And so I've been trying to be a little bit more of a leader on the front of reflection, because I think our pace of life is so quick. Have a conversation like this, and right after we hop off, each of us are going to switch on to something else. And it's a dice roll whether we actually pause long enough to consider, what did that mean for us? What do we want to make that mean? What do we want to
Yeah.
do with it? Is there anything that we want to take from this conversation and convert it into action moving forward, etc.?
Yeah. I have the joy of replaying this whole thing at least once as I
Yeah.
go through the editing process. So I get built-in reflection, which is
Right.
lovely. Um, uh, what what has been one of the biggest takeaways for you doing all of this work that you've been doing? Um, how has it shaped the direction of travel for you and what's coming next, I suppose?
Mm. Yeah, so this is, you mentioned your dyslexia and superpower to connect dots, even though it slows down reading pace sometimes.
Hmm.
Although not audiobooks. Will, who had dyslexia, used to just eat audiobooks and just consume them. But Will and I were co-giving a keynote 8 years ago or something, and the subtitle of "Ask Powerful Questions." We were in conversation with somebody afterward, and he misspoke, or no, actually, I think we were on stage. He misspoke the subtitle of the book. He said, "Ask Powerful Questions: Conversations that Create Matter," instead of "Create Conversations that Matter," which is what the actual subtitle is. And I didn't think anything of it. In fact, I was like, Will, like dyslexia coming out in front of 800 people. And I was thinking of it for many, many years until a couple years ago. A mentor of mine, Mark Levy, Mark Levy's claim to fame is he helped Simon Sinek find his why. So he met Simon Sinek when he was broke, desperate, and poor, and was like, "Oh man, Simon, you got to work with me." And he helps. Mark helps speaker, author, facilitator types find their big, sexy idea. So what's the thing? You walk into a room full of people who have their arms crossed. Their boss made them be there. They don't want to be there. They already don't like you, even though they haven't met you. What is the idea that you share with them in that time that is so interesting and compelling that it gets even the grumpiest person to uncross their arms and say, like, oh, that's actually a pretty good idea. I'm interested. Let me learn more. So anyway, to make a long story longer, I was having a chat with Mark, and he just a little bit of connection before content. He asked me, what's something you'd like to do more of? Which is one of the questions on this deck of We Connect cards that I've created. And I thought about it, and my answer was scuba diving. I've got 2 young kids, and I haven't gone diving since they were born. And at the time of recording right now, Otto's 5 years old. And so this is something I cared about, passionate about scuba diving for lobster, have not prioritized it at all. And that was it. That was the conversation. We kind of like went on, and that was it. It wasn't until about 8 months later, I flew down to work with a client in Florida, and I flew down just early enough to fit in a quick dive hunting for shark fossils beforehand. And when I popped my head out of the water, it like hit me like a lightning bolt. Like, holy smokes! If Mark didn't ask me that question 8 months ago, there is a 0% chance that I would have kind of thought about and realized that I wasn't prioritizing this thing that I cared about. I wouldn't have been here. And so, what he did is he didn't create a conversation that mattered. He inspired a conversation that created matter. It actually edited something in my future, my physical reality. And that is what I'm on about. So my last 10 years has been spent creating conversations that matter for people. And I think my next 10 or more years will be focused about, really focused on helping people talk their way into tomorrow. So having a conversation that actually edits what happens next in some way. Because otherwise, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really
So,
cool.
uh,
Yeah. Well, just know that I'll be watching from the sidelines over here,
yeah,
and
man.
learning
Well,
as we
and
go.
you asked if I was launching anything, and so in my mind, the sequel to the book is not, um, it's not create conversations that matter, or so it's not conversations that create matter. It's a card deck of questions that I have very carefully curate for every question to kind of have the same impact as what's something you want to do more of. And so it's a deck of 60 questions
Cool.
that are all like edit buttons for what happens next. And so I'm super, super psyched to kind of unleash those to the world this fall.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Chad, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. And I'm very grateful that you replied to my email and said yes to doing this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a treat.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the conversation, feel free to subscribe and join me and my new guest next time. If you're interested in the work I'm doing, or you think I can be of service to you or your organisation, please email dave@simplicityofmind.co.uk. Remember, see if you can find time to slow down and reflect. Those simple ideas might be worth listening to. Take care, and I hope you can join me in a couple of weeks.